Good afternoon. I'm Benjamin Weah, and this is my persuasive speech for COM 231 Public Speaking. And here is the speech outline that I will be reading from to aid in my extemporaneous delivery of this speech. Thank you. The U.S. Civil War lasted from 1861 to 1865 between the Union North, which fought to preserve the Union after the Confederate South rebelled with their claim of fighting for the rights of states. And if I was to ask you, when most of the statues and monuments honoring these Confederate leaders were erected, what would you guess? Within 10 years of the war, 20 years, 30 years, when most of these leaders started to pass away from old age? No, it was actually 1911, 46 years after the war ended, when the largest number of statues honoring Confederate leaders were erected. Today, there are over 700 statues or monuments to Confederate leaders still standing in the southern United States. It's estimated there's well over 1,000 road signs, school names, the names of military bases, all attributed to honoring Southern leaders, Confederate leaders. The removal of Confederate statues from public spaces is currently a highly debated topic. My research has shown that the true nature and purpose of Confederate statues is not honoring these rebels' fight for states' rights. Confederate statues are still standing in many places in the southern United States as part of a surviving lost cause narrative, which depicts the Confederacy as a group of honorable rebels fighting for the rights of states. But this narrative is born from white supremacy. In this speech, I will talk about lost cause revisionism, the dark backgrounds of the subjects of these monuments, and the modern-day fight for their removal from public spaces. First, let's discuss the time period of historical revisionism that most of these statues were erected during. The lost cause is known as the movement where Southern Confederate veterans and their descendants decided to reframe the narrative of the cause of the Confederacy from one to preserve the institution of slavery to one to fight for the rights of states and oppression against the federal government. But according to the Southern Poverty Law Center in 2019, most of these Confederate statues were erected decades after the Civil War ended in the early 20th century. And according to Ryan Best with the Washington Post, this coincided with a time period where Jim Crow laws were enacted. And Jim Crow laws were a legal method to disenfranchise Black voters, take away their property rights, and limit their spaces that were available to them in public life. The lost cause narrative takes the attention away from the fact that in Southern states' own words, their main priority and reason for declaring rebellion against the Union was for the preservation of slavery. For example, in 1861, the Mississippi Declaration of Independence states, "Our position is thoroughly identified with the institution of slavery, the greatest material interest of the world." So, how do we reconcile their own words compared to what people would say decades later, that states like Mississippi were really just fighting against an oppressive federal government? But we have their own words to look at. But that's how we know that the reframing of this war does not hold any true water. And if the South was really fighting to protect independence of states from the federal government, then why would they fight so hard before the Civil War to pass the Fugitive Slave Act? According to Paul C.A. with the Virginia Commonwealth University in 2016, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 was a law that the federal government passed that forced northern states where slavery was illegal to extradite runaway, escaped fugitive slaves back to their plantations and owners in the South. Now, the southern states rallied and fought very hard to have this law passed, But that's really no different from them trying to have the federal government impose their will among the North, like they were claiming that their concern of the Civil War was the federal government imposing their will upon them. So this hypocrisy really is the final nail in the coffin for the Lost Cause movement. So there are some flaws with the premise that the Confederacy is deserving to be honored, but how about the actual individuals who have statues of themselves standing? According to Connor O'Neill with Time magazine in 2020, there are dozens of statues, monuments, and street signs honoring Confederate General Nathaniel Bedford Forrest. Nathaniel Bedford Forrest became the first Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, their unusually titled #1 spot for leading that organization. A group that, in that time period of the 1870s, was responsible for the lynching and murder of many free Black people. According to the journal Southern Cultures in 2014, Bill Doris, the owner of a large Nathaniel Bedford Forrest statue in Memphis, Tennessee, believes that slavery was a welfare program for Blacks. So this really gives insight to what people who honor these statues today are thinking. Robert E. Lee is one of the most revered Confederate leaders memorialized by statues across the southern United States. But according to reporter Jillian Brockwell with the Washington Post, Robert E. Lee owned hundreds of slaves and treated them poorly, reportedly participating in the whipping and physical punishments of the slaves himself. Now, the argument that Lee was a product of his time and just a Southern gentleman does not hold up when we remember that there were white abolitionists that existed in the South at the same exact time. So we don't need to compare his morals against today. We can compare his morals against his own time, when people knew that slavery was wrong. Lee also broke his own promise when he said he joined the Civil War just to protect Virginia, when he initiated combat in the Civil War by attempting to invade the North. Now, what is the reasoning that we're using now and today to debate and fight for the removal of Confederate statues from public spaces? George Floyd was a Black man who in 2020 was choked to death by white police officers. And this reignited nationwide movements of Black Lives Matter, and part of their demands were the removal of Confederate statues from public spaces. Public figures began connecting the symbols with their true racist, lost cause, revisionist history. And even a Republican-led committee in Congress decided to change the names of military bases that are named for Confederate generals. Our own local Fort Bragg is going to have its name changed from its current name of Bragg, from General Braxton Bragg. Many activists now support monuments existing in museums with context or in private spaces to be honored however people please. But public spaces are where we show others what our community chooses to honor, and we should not choose to honor this racist past. In conclusion, Confederate monuments exist to perpetuate a false lost cause narrative, honor morally corrupt figures, and modern society is starting to realize that this racist divide these statues stand for. While individuals have the right to honor whatever they choose in private or in the context of a museum, the things we make public memorials of are for showing others what our communities value. Let's choose to value the things that bring us together and not choose to honor our racist past, because we can admit and acknowledge our racist past without it defining us today. Thank you very much.